My next Patreon question comes from Morgan, who is curious why a specific movie musical has not been discussed much recently. With the current climate, there's been a particular movie that is on my mind that seems to go under the radar. A sweet musical that was made in the 1940s and written by E.Y. Harburg, who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and Fred Sadie. It was made during the roadshow gold rush, and was moderately successful. I do wonder if its themes still hold up today, but there are certain elements that make me question if it will offend some folks. I ask unto you, what are your thoughts on Francis Ford Coppola's Finian's Rainbow? And does the controversial content match that of Gone with the Wind or Song of the South? In fact, why isn't this getting much attention? For those unaware, Finian's Rainbow was a staged musical that was adapted for the screen in 1968, with a pre-Godfather Francis Ford Coppola as director. It's an odd film with many plot threads going on, most of which I unfortunately did not find all that interesting. There's the main storyline where an Irishman named Finian steals gold from a leprechaun and hides it under land he has bought. Then the leprechaun falls in love with Finian's daughter, Sharon. Sharon meanwhile becomes infatuated with a landowner attempting to sell specially created tobacco. And there's the subplot Morgan is referring to, involving a racist senator. There's a lot happening, and Coppola struggles with juggling them within this jolly musical. Apparently Coppola tried to add more realism to the story, which the cast found unusual for a film involving magical gold, leprechauns, and fantastical wishes. With the exception of the main theme, Look to the Rainbow, a lot of the songs went in one ear and out the other for me. Thankfully, even at the age of 69, Fred Astaire still maintained his on-screen charisma and that spring in his step. One character that got on my nerves was Og the Leprechaun, although I did wonder if he served as a possible inspiration for Austin Powers. Strangely, despite this being a Warner Brothers production, it had more of the feel of a Disney movie. The way it's filmed, the style of comedy, and the type of songs are quite reminiscent of Disney films from the era. The senator is even played by Keenan Wynn, who was the villain in several Disney comedies around that time. For the most part, the film plays out like your standard fantasy musical. But there's one notable element that stands out. The villains are bigots who oppose the mixing of races who live in Rainbow Valley, the land Finian buys. This leads the film touching on the subject of equal rights for black people, and to Coppola's credit, he did seem aware of the troubling way African Americans have been portrayed in cinema over the preceding decades. There's a scene where one of the bumbling villains condescendingly tells a black character that they should watch Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation. When the senator tries to force the black citizens of Rainbow Valley off the land, Sharon wishes for him to become a black man. And that's exactly what happens, complete with Keenan Wynn wearing blackface. The whole point of this is for the senator to learn tolerance, and not to be a racist, so I guess its heart is in the right place. But execution is another thing. Blackface is completely wrong, and it's hard to ignore the uncomfortableness of how this plot point is done. When the stage show was first performed in 1947, the NAACP disapproved of it, and recent revivals of Finian's Rainbow have had a different actor play the senator when he becomes black. In the early 1950s, a producer named Michael Shore felt the best way to adapt the show to the screen was via animation, and this proposed animated film actually came close to happening. John Hubley was hired to direct and storyboarded almost the entire film. The cast, which included Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong, and Jim Backus, had recorded the vocals, including the soundtrack, and work had even started on the animation. Unfortunately, this was during McCarthy's communist witch hunt, and Hubley's refusal to name names in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee led to financiers pulling the funding, and it was never completed. Would it have been better? It's hard to know, but the few publicly available sketches and storyboards show promise. So why have we not seen much discussion about Finian's Rainbow within the current discourse of how past films and television shows have depicted African Americans? I think it's due to the film being largely forgotten outside of maybe Fred Astaire fans and those fascinated by the movie musicals of the 60s. When people talk about Francis Ford Coppola's filmography, it's limited to only a handful of titles, like the Godfather trilogy, Apocalypse Now, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, along with the occasional mention of The Conversation, The Outsiders, Peggy Sue Got Married, and Jack. Finian's Rainbow is also not considered one of the greatest films of all time, like Gone with the Wind, propped up as a landmark in filmmaking like Birth of a Nation, or seen its studio try to prevent availability like Song of the South. Hollywood has a long, unfortunate history with presenting blackface in films, and it is something that should be addressed and analyzed, including in Finian's Rainbow. But it's otherwise a film that will probably remain overlooked. Thank you for your question, Morgan.